I joined the military out of community college in upstate New York. I was trying to make a new and exciting life for myself as a journalist, and a recruiter called me up and asked me what I was studying at community college, having gotten my phone number from them, and I told him I wanted to be a journalist. So he offered me a journalist job in the Army, and I said, okay, sure, why not? I'm broke, don't have much else going on here. So I joined the Army to be a journalist, and discovered that Army journalists were really just public affairs people, which was enlightening. Well, I learned how the technical skills associated with being a reporter, being a newspaper worker, doing graphic design and newspaper layout, and some simple photography, some some reporting on this, that, and the other thing. But I was always writing from the perspective of the Army, and not really doing any real investigating of anything. It was just sort of go out and write a story about this, get quotes that support the Army's view, and then write it. It was always a little bit of mental gymnastics, let's say, that it took to wrap my head around being good at being the military's, one of the military's professional internal propagandists, I guess, because we were compiling stories that were not untrue. We weren't making up stories, but we were telling the stories that were going on, like focusing only on all of the wonderful things that the Army is doing in Iraq, and not focusing on the fact that the mission essentially is failing in Iraq, and not focus on the fact that most people don't want us there, not focus on the fact that we're actually just paying people not to kill us at this point. There are all different sort of realities that were at play. But then at the same token, I wasn't going to start trying to tell the real story, because that would only get me all kinds of trouble. It wasn't, at that point I was just concerned with making it through the military and getting out and moving on with my life. They don't emphasize when you join the military that your initial contract is actually 8 years. No matter how many years they say you're signing up for, the initial contract goes 8 years. And usually most people will sign up for 3 to 5 years as their initial contract. But in the small print, it says for 8 years, you're essentially owned by the military. Once you get off of active service, you still have the remainder of that 8 years left in which you can be called back. And most people don't actually think about this, because nobody was thinking, well, I'm sure I'll get called back, and it just wasn't a reality at that point when I joined. And then the stop loss policy basically meant that there was absolutely nothing wrong with the military keeping you in past your initial enlistment time. So I had originally signed up for 5 years, because the recruiter had told me that I had to sign up for 5 years to get the journalist job, which may or may not have been true. And then I was extended for a year. I was supposed to get out in June of 2007, and instead of getting out in June of 2007, I was in Iraq. So they sent me home from Iraq in the first wave of folks going back, and I basically just out processed super fast, and then I was a civilian again less than a month after I got home from my deployment. So I needed some time to kind of like drive around and clear my head, or just get reacquainted with America, with life outside the Army. The role of the public affairs team in combat theater was to essentially like babysit journalists. So journalists would come and be sort of escorted around by a public affairs team and embedded with certain units who had been given, proper training on how to talk to the media. And, it really, military public affairs played a huge role in the way that that this war was reported, and it kept a lot of the hard questions from really coming out in a large way, I think, because each journalist knew, unless they were going to go completely rogue, right? Like each journalist knew that the only way you can report on the war with the military and like go out with military units is through being embedded. And if you publish really unfavorable stuff about the military after you go out with these units, they're not going to be quick to let you go do that again. But essentially, I would just like to help educate people on how to really read the bias in the reporting from the war and understand the context of a lot of the reporting as having been largely kind of controlled by the military. In 2005, I went out on a night raid with this one unit that was going after a bunch of high value targets, terrorists, right, insurgents, whatever we were calling them that day. And I went out with one team. A few different teams went out. I went out with one team. The team I was with didn't catch any of the people they were looking for. They busted into a lot of houses and didn't find anybody. But some of the other people in other teams did catch people. There was no further details given on who the individuals were that they caught, but the story I had to write the next day was not about how failed intelligence led to us knocking down a bunch of people's doors fruitlessly, but it was about how this unit had captured all of these quote-unquote insurgents, but it didn't, they were just detainees, and it was just a number. I was like, we captured 90 detainees. So it wasn't a story about who those people were. There was no mention of if they were actually criminals of any nature, if they were just suspected of being associated with the terrorists, or who they were. There was never any mention of the fact that one of the teams completely didn't get anybody. There was and there was not any follow-up or any context really given about who these people were or why we were specifically after them. So it was just like the story that said, look at how great we are, we captured all these people, and that was it. With the internet, the need for the military to keep pushing out information, people kept wanting information, right? And so then there's the internet, and so the military public relations used to have a much easier job before everyone was able to take pictures and write stories and publish and get online. Now the military has a much bigger job on its hand, because it has to push its message forth in a climate where people can question it a lot easier now. People can just look online and say, okay, this is what the military is saying. What are other people saying now? That didn't used to be an option. It's just what's in the newspapers, what's on the radio. Okay, there it is. So it's gotten a lot more complex. Well, first and foremost, we can start reframing some of the terminology and the way that we talk about veterans and the wars. I think that there's there's a tendency, a very, the official tendency is to make veterans into heroes, right? And so there's this there's this chasm of space between the way the military says veterans are heroes and the way that we're actually treated when we're in the military and when we come home. And the American public kind of eats up this veterans as heroes, defending your freedom rhetoric, and I think it really blocks people's cognitive ability to understand that we're not doing heroic work. And not only that, but we aren't heroes in that we're human, and when we come home from doing whatever work we're doing, whether it's public affairs, internal propaganda, or whether it's being a sniper, or whether it's being a medic, or a prison guard, or an interrogator, or a map maker, or any of the other things, that's not heroic work. We're just doing what we're told, and we're doing it because we need to have options to live our lives. Most people in the military don't feel like heroes, and when we get out and we're basically treated like we're lying if we go to the VA and say we're having a problem with some part of us, or we try to get our benefits. It's like a huge ordeal to get a claim going, and if and I think that there's this, but all the while we're being told we're heroes, right? So like, you're a hero, but if you tell us that you need help, you're clearly full of it. And it's like, and then we try to talk to the American people about the war, and they're just like, oh yeah, thank you so much for your service. And meanwhile, it's basically like the ultimate blow off, because like, well, I'm thanking you, so please don't tell me about it. And so what I would say the American people can do is stop thanking us and start actually like sitting down and having conversations with us about our experiences if we want, but at least stop with the hero and the gratitude rhetoric, and start with the how are you doing, or welcome home type of conversation starter. And it doesn't take much to communicate a desire to understand more, Veterans who come home and speak out against the war are frequently looked at as somehow as like traitors in the veterans community, or like we have done something wrong by speaking out against the wars, rather than just being grateful for being called heroes, and here's your parade, and yada yada yada. And we're told what we're told when we try to get benefits, there's all of these like safeguards against us like exploiting the system or something like that. We're seen as traitors and system exploiters for trying to demand truth and treatment, right? But then there's no counter narrative of we're the ones who were exploited in the first place. We signed up because we, for whatever reason, thought that we could gain useful skills and be productive members of society, only to be essentially like kind of chewed up and spat out. And then we're told that we're the ones exploiting the system, and the system is what's exploiting us.